Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for making it to BIC this evening. All these conversations that we've been having are part of something called the Saligav Balka. It's named after Heta's Balka in Saligav, where a whole bunch of us have received educations in heritage, history, art, and culture over the last few years. And with the new book that Heta's launched in November, we thought we should use it as an opportunity to travel to other cities and also have conversations with other authors who've documented people and places and share their experiences with documenting people and places. And that's how we have Roopa here today, who has written a book on Cubbon Park. Thank you for coming. We'll start with Heta. You've had a long career before arriving at this book. You started your career with Jane Goodall, pioneered a whole bunch of heritage movements in Mumbai and eventually in Goa, and you've written 11 books on Goan history, art and culture. Could you quickly summarize your experiences for us?
Thank you, Hari. Is working? Okay. Yes, I started my working life with Dr. Jane Goodall in Tanzania, East Africa. I was her research assistant, her field assistant. We were following chimpanzees in the wild from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, documenting and recording on the minute their movements, their interactions. And I was given the mother with children because the chimpanzee family is mom and kids. It's not mom, dad, and kids. So that's how I started. And my interest in heritage began in Africa, actually, when I went to Zanzibar. And I saw this long tower-like structure in Zanzibar that was the Sultan's harem. And he had installed a window right on top and another window right at the bottom, because he didn't want the ladies in the harem to get suntanned, imagine, in Zanzibar. In the African sun. So, and these poor ladies, the doctors would say, they would report they had eye infections, skin infections, and whatnot. And this is how it got me thinking that, this is, architecture is really evidence of history. It's the story of people's lives. That was one thing that happened in Africa, and that started the whole movement. When I came back to Bombay, I started looking for jobs with the World Wide Fund for Nature. That was the World Wildlife Fund then. But somehow it didn't work out. And then I joined Shyam Chainani, the Bombay Environmental Action Group, and started working with him, saving natural spaces and urban spaces in Bombay. And that's a long story, but I was working for Bombay Environmental Action Group, and then the riots in '93 happened in Bombay, and decided to leave. My cousin Maruk and I went to Munnar through our little Parsi contacts in the Tata Tea, and we went and worked in the tea gardens for a year and a half, and then motorcycle accident, and then I didn't want to continue in the tea gardens after the accident, came to Goa, and then set up, that's another whole new chapter in my life, set up the Goa Heritage Action Group, and I've been in Goa for 27 years now.
Thank you, Heta. Roopa, you've also put out 25 books in a really short period of time. Could you take us through a few of your books and, a few of your books?
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. And it's lovely to be here with Heta. I just been going, for the last week or so, I've been going through her latest book, and it's beautiful, it's lushly produced. And Goa, I think, is one of everybody's favorite places. But we think of it only as a tourist paradise, beaches, sun and sand. So to see this side of Goa, that somebody is really preserving it, was very, very nice. And yeah, lovely work. My journey is far more prosaic. I haven't been following chimpanzees or anything as exciting as that. I have had a typical Bangalore childhood and youth. Means what? I became an engineer. Okay, that is the typical Bangalore childhood and youth. I went to a convent school and then I became an engineer. I didn't want to be an engineer, but my parents wanted me to be an engineer because that's what good middle class girls did in the 80s and 90s. So I did that, and but I always wanted to write. That was a very strong call. It was a total vocation thing, and I grew up reading Enid Blyton, like everybody of my generation, just devouring her. And she wrote wonderfully well. She taught me the art of writing well, good dialogue, great plots, pacey, page turner kind of writing, and across a variety of genres. But the only thing that was, and a lot of moral education came from Enid Blyton as well, without being so in your face. But all the dolls in the nursery, the jealous ones, the selfish ones, the greedy ones, so you got to learn a lot of that. But the only problem with reading so much Enid Blyton was that I grew up thinking that only British children had cool childhoods, and my childhood somehow sucked. Yeah. And because the kind of picnics they used to have, and the complete absence of any adult life in their environment. There were just no adults. Adults came only to deliver squash and cookies, and they could only be let in if they knew the password and all that. So, and my childhood was completely different, surrounded by adults, and all adults, and I would be some few of us kids in an ambassador car. That's all, and always going to Lal Bagh and Cubbon Park, basically. Not in the countryside, cycling, rowing to islands, nothing of that sort, not even boarding school, just at home. But it took me a while. I grew up thinking this for a long time, and the other real huge misconception that I had was that England was sunny. Because in Enid Blyton books, it is always sunshiny, and the rain is very rare. And only when I grew up a little bit, I began to realize, and started studying history and this, that, you begin to realize that this is a romanticized version of England, and it's been fed to children who had traumatic childhoods, where the parents were at war, London was going to be bombed, they were sent away to the countryside to keep them safe. They had no idea when they came back whether their houses would be standing, whether their parents would be alive. So you had to make the countryside fun. You had to make being without adults fun. While, in fact, it must have been a very stressful time for the children. So then, immediately, my lens flipped, and it had to be an Indian children's magazine that taught me this. It was an Indian children's magazine called Target. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Heta. Yeah, it was Roslyn Wilson, exactly. It came out of the stable of India Today. And it was so sad, now thinking back, that I had to find a magazine where the problem was, when we were growing up, there weren't many Indian children's books in English. So there were, the only books I read was Enid Blyton or Amar Chitra Katha. Amar Chitra Katha was wonderful. I loved the mythology, and it made me fall in love with mythology.
Something called Tinkle also.
Tinkle later, little later, yeah. That also came out from, but they were still comic books, and none of them had children like me in them. There was no, as they call it today, representation. An Indian child did not have representation in Indian books of English. And so it took a while, but once Target came into my life, and they were talking about the short stories, they talked about children like me, but they all seemed to be having a very wonderful time. And so I needed someone to show me a mirror that your childhood is actually very lovely, that the fact that you have so many nurturing adults around you is a good thing. The fact that you are eating boring, according to me, it was very boring lemon rice, curd rice at picnics, because South Indian childhood, that's what you get for picnic lunch. And I wanted to eat things out of cans. And I'm vegetarian, South Indian, I was lusting after things like tongue and ham without knowing what it was. Okay, so, and then I said, it came to me that if I'm eating chitrana and mosrana, that means there were enough adults who cared enough to wake up early, prepare it fresh for me. So I should actually be counting my blessings. And then when I went to live in England, I realized that, oh my God, there is no sun here. And in fact, all these metaphors or words in English say very warm people, warm is not a good adjective in India. You want it to be cool. Warm is a horrible. So all those things. And then I began to say to myself that when I grow up and I begin to write, I will write Indian stories for Indian children, so that another generation does not have to grow up feeling that somehow they are at a disadvantage. And that's what I have done. with my books. So I've written one of my earliest books. I started writing books late in life. I've been writing for children's stories for very long, but books came in quite recently, maybe about 15 years ago. This series called Tara Knots, which is a fantasy adventure series, and actually went on to become the first fantasy adventure series for children in English. So that uses a lot of, oh shucks, and that's my phone, I'm sorry, I didn't switch it off. Just, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, Tara Knots has a mix of Indian and Western English words. So it's a lot of, I mean, it's difficult to explain, but it's a parallel universe. It's got a lot of India in it. It's called Mithya. So people who read it, kids who read it have loved it. And yeah, so that was my thing, that I will not write about dragons and goblins and gnomes. And, you know, I will trawl through Indian mythology and Indian stories to find Indian things that Indian children can be proud of and identify with. So that's my children's writing journey. About heritage, how I came to it is when I went to live in the US. And, you know, we all have talked about this anecdotally, how they make such a big deal of every small bit of history that they have. And then you come back and say, my God, that country didn't even exist in 1775. And they said, and we are some 5,000 years old, and we have so much history all around us. And we take it so much for granted, and we don't even bother finding out about it. So then, and particularly Bangalore, because Bangalore is seen as this very young, hip, modern kind of city. So you feel, and when people visit us in Bangalore and say, show us your city, we are like, after, maybe Vidhan Sauda, after that, what do you show? There are no buildings to show. So you grow up assuming that Bangalore doesn't have history, but Bombay has, and Delhi has, and Calcutta has. But
And now Goa has.
now Goa has. So that's what now. So then when we begin to look, then you find that Bangalore has such a rich history. Every street corner has history. It didn't become this modern hip city by chance. It didn't happen randomly. There has been a method. There's a reason. So when you start finding out the stories, that fast. So I had to go to the US again. I had to go somewhere else to look at my country and say, my God, why aren't we celebrating our own history? And then come back and begin this. Yeah, that's my journey.
Thank you, Roopa. I have 3 observations. There's 2 engineers on this stage right now. Apparently, it's a requirement to be in heritage. Heta is also happily enjoying bisi bele baat and masrana for lunch in Bangalore. I also actually spent 2 years in Cubbon Park, holding a community space every Sunday for 2 whole years. And I didn't know Cubbon Park had such a long history, and I'm glad I came across your book now. What made you stop and write a book about Cubbon Park, and what did you hope to achieve by writing this book?
So I usually write for children. So Cubbon Park is one of my very first books for adults or general interest. Mostly I write for children. But a couple of years ago, just before COVID hit, I wrote my first sort of book for adults, which is again in some because I write about a variety of different things. So this was actually Milind Soman's memoir. So that is my first book for adults actually. And I think that sort of gave people an idea that, okay, she can write for adults as well. So then one of my friends who has edited 2 of my children's books, who's called Sudeshna, she now works with a publishing house called Speaking Tiger. So I've been, my husband and I started Bangalore Walks in 2005. So I've been talking about Bangalore's history and heritage to students. Mostly I do the kids' works, kids and students, and also for people who come in from outside, locals. I've been talking and all, but I've not ever written a book. I'm a writer and I'm a tourist guide, but I had never combined the 2 in a book. And so what happened was, she said that Speaking Tiger was doing these city books. But while earlier, city books used to mean a book on Bangalore, a book on Bombay, like, you know. Now they said that it's too vast a subject to encompass in one book. So why don't we deep dive into neighborhoods and do something specific so we can go granular a bit and not always take this 30,000 feet view. And so they had already brought out 2 books on Delhi, Chandni Chowk and Connaught Place, I think. And in Bombay, they had brought out Shivaji Park and Kolaba. And then they wanted to bring out a neighborhood book on Bangalore. And they said, you know, since you've been doing these walks, would you like to write a book? And I, of course, jumped because my head sort of automatically begins to nod yes whenever Bangalore is mentioned, whatever, you know. So like, yes, I'll do it. So then they said, okay, she said, what neighborhood do you want to write about? And that really put me in a quandary because I said, what neighborhood has stayed with me and grown with me and means a lot to me from the time I was born till now. I grew up in, I lived in Kumara Park, Sheshadripuram. My whole life was spent around Malleshwaram, basically, school and college. And then I got married and came to Indranagar. But none of these places have held me throughout. Like, that was my childhood, this is my adulthood. And then I went away for 12 years, lived across the world, came back. So I was like, which neighborhood do I... And I talk about, in my heritage walks, I talk mostly about MG Road, the Victorian Bangalore part. But that is again something to do with work. But what is that space that has held me throughout my life? And I was getting myself into such a tizzy that my editor said, you know, it doesn't have to be like a conventional neighborhood. You can think of maybe a garden or something, maybe Lal Bagh. And that's when it hit me. I said, Lal Bagh, there are enough books about Lal Bagh, you know, and it's more a botanical garden than a people's park, in my mind. Many Bangaloreans will disagree, but in my mind and then I said, I know what I'm going to write about. I'm going to write about Cubbon Park because it has helped from the time I was a little kid and was taken to Cubbon Park on weekends to ride on the Putani Express and to eat cotton candy and all that. Till then I was born at St. Martha's Hospital, which is on the periphery of Cubbon Park. I went to college at Vishweshwaraya College of Engineering, periphery of Cubbon Park. My dad was a member of Century Club, so we used to keep going there. And so I've spent, and then I lived across the world, came back to Bangalore, brought my kids to Cubbon Park. They enjoyed it so much, picnics, birthday parties, all that. And then now the kids have grown up and gone. Now I take my dog there to Cubbon Park twice a week because it's the only public park in Bangalore that allows dogs. You know, so somehow it has always adapted itself to fit my aspirations. Whatever I needed, I have always found in Cubbon Park. And strangely enough, it lies exactly in the center of my parents' house and my in-laws' house. So, you know, I have to keep passing it every time I go back and forth. And to me, and location-wise, when I began to think about Cubbon Park, I realized that location-wise, it has always been at the center of the city, at the border of the old city, Pete, and cantonment. So once when Bangalore became, when Bengaluru Pete and Bangalore cantonment, which were two separate administrative entities, at independence they were merged to become the new capital of Karnataka. That's when Cubbon Park became the place where both the city people would feel comfortable and the canton. Both of them felt it was their park. It was the place which melted all differences and became Bangalore's park, you know. And when I thought of that, I said, this is what I want to write about. And when I finished it, I realized that it was the very first book on Cubbon Park. Yeah, apparently. Nobody has written a book on Cubbon. There are so many books on Lal Bagh, but nobody had written a book exclusive on Cubbon. But you will never, if you look at Bangalore tourism or anything about Bangalore, there is not one article or feature where Cubbon Park is not mentioned. But it's only mentioned. But what the park is, nobody had talked about. So yeah, that's how I came to it. Sorry, no. Heta, you
Roopa,
talk.
congratulations on your book being the first book on Cubbon Park.
Yeah.
And I think I get what you say. As a Bangalorean, you never truly drift away from Cubbon Park.
Yeah.
And I think in Heta's work, she's never drifted away from Goan Houses. Her first book was Houses of Goa. I think it went into 5 reprints and it's become a landmark reference book in Goa for domestic architecture. You've gone on to document Goa through monumental architecture, master craftsmen, and a whole bunch of, over the last few years, oral history. And with your newest book, you've come back to Goan Houses. Why Goan Houses again?
The first book, Houses of Goa, was published in 1998 by an architectural firm called Architecture Autonomous, Gerard de Cunha, if you've heard of him. So at that time, the focus was on architecture. In fact, I had to fight to put the last chapter in personality profiles, where I've highlighted 6 houses and the families that lived there. Over the years, as people open up their doors and as they started sharing stories, I realized that the houses are just empty shells without the stories of the families that live there. That's why it was time now to bring out a book on the families, their stories. They also started sharing a lot more now than when I first came to Goa 27 years ago.
Why is that? Do you think? Younger generation?
I think it's not just the younger generation. I think there was a bit of, let me tell you a little story of what used to happen, you know. When I went to one of the houses with the team, this is way back in 98, it was a cold call, blind date, completely. We had no references or nobody to say that, oh, my uncle has this house, go and see it, and so on. So I walk in and there's this lady sitting outside on the balcony, which is like an inside-outside space, the Otla in Gujarati and balcony and Sopo in Konkani. And she was sitting on the armchair and I said, you know, we're doing this book on houses of Goa and can we feature your house? So she looks up at me and she says, where's the book? This is the kind of reception we used to get. And I also share the other story about Kandalam. There's a house in Kandalam that we went to. My team and I were there, and she said, this beautiful house, and let's take pictures from the outside. We don't even have to ask for permission. So I said, no. I told my designer, Rukshana, I said, we can polish my halo in the morning and say, that no, we can't do this. We have to ask for permission, even if we are taking a picture from the outside, from the street. So we knock on this door, and this gentleman opens it just this much, the door. And I said, we're doing this book on houses of Goa, and we'd like to take a picture of the exterior of the home. We're not coming in. Can we take a picture? Bang! He slams the door shut, saying, no. So Rukshana, being Rukshana, says, oh, we can't just give up, let's try again. So we knock on the door again. And she says, sir, we've come from Gerard de Cunha's office. So he opened the door wide and he says, in that case, not at all. Bum. Now we've come a long way since then. Now we have people calling up and say, Heta, come to my house. Uncle has a house. Grandpa's house is there. Even if you don't want to put it in the book, come and have a look and come and see. So I think that trust has been built over. That's the first thing. Love and trust. That's the first thing that you need before you embark on anything. I think you'll agree with me.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
I think that's quite the transformation in terms of acceptance in these Goan houses. Roopa, have you seen a lot of change in Cubbon Park from when you used to go as a kid to now?
Sure. I think lots of changes. The saddest part right now, I mean, it's soon going to open, I think, but the Putani Express hasn't been running for a while. So, yeah, but huge changes since I used to go. First of all, my own perspective. As a child, for me, Cubbon Park was Bal Bhavan. I didn't even used to explore the further parts of Cubbon Park. We used to be taken there. We used to hang out only there. Climb on those cement elephants and horses and eat popcorn, watch a show at Bal Bhavan maybe, have a picnic or something and come back. But as you, and I went away after, I went to, I said, right, so college also, that time we used to just walk in, but it was never considered a very safe place. For a long time, Cubbon Park was not considered a safe place to hang out, particularly after dark, or just particularly for women to go. So because it wasn't so well taken care of, it had become a place where you would find all the vagabonds, the vagrants would be there, and somebody would be trying to sell you drugs, or, so all kinds of what we call shady characters used to be there. So it wasn't a very safe place. And it didn't have that many trees either, at that time. It had some trees, but not that many. But when I went away for 12 years and I came back, things had begun to change. And as I say in my book, I was trying to analyze what had changed about it, and I think social media has played a big part, and migrants coming into Bangalore from outside, looking for places to take their children to or to run in. Running became a big thing around 2004. That's when the first Standard Chartered Mumbai Marathon came to India. Okay, so that was the first actual international marathon that happened in India. And after that, sort of it became, maybe Nike was trying to sell its products or something, I don't know what, but running became a huge trend across India. So when you're running, then you want to look for a park, you want to look for a place to run. So young people interested in the park as a place for running or other activities began to come to the park. And then people would take pictures of the Tabibuya, put it up on Facebook, and then more people would come. And that's when everybody started taking an interest in the park, including the horticulture department and everything. But so it has changed a lot. Now it's really well maintained. It's really beautiful. It's fenced in. It's very safe. It's become a beautiful park. But as I mentioned in the book, it's the 1998 activism that happened. Unfortunately, I was not living here at that time, so I missed that whole period. So I had to. Thankfully, one of the people I spoke to who was one of the main protagonists in that activism in the protests, has a whole folder of newspaper cuttings from that time. So he lent it to me and I could go through it. But you know how Cubbon Park is located if you're from Bangalore? It is the nucleus around which the 4 pillars of democracy swirl. So because there is the legislature, Vidhan Sabha is right there. There is the judiciary, Athara Kacheri is right there. There is the executive, which sits in that very unimaginatively named building, MSB, multi-storied building. Okay. And there is the press, the 4th estate. Press is all around, MG Road here, there, and also right inside the park, they have the press club. So all these very important pillars of democracy surround a huge green lung space right in the middle of the city, and everybody has their greedy eyes on it. So everybody is always trying to take a bit of the park for themselves. So in 1975, 76 something, the Parks Preservation Act was brought into force, which said that nobody can touch any part of Cubbon Park, not a brick can be put in, nothing can be built new, etc. So that carried on for a while because there was a lot of misuse happening of the park, so they brought this Parks Preservation Act in. But by and by, the government themselves wanted to build Vikasa Saudha. They want to add some statues, they want to do things. And all that area, including where the Vidhan Saudha is now, used to be Cubbon Park. So they could not actually build anything, touch anything, demolish anything in that space. So in 1998, the Chief Minister was J.H. Patel, and he mooted a thing that we should denotify 44 acres of the park because we want to keep it for ourselves and we want to build things. Come on. I mean, Vidhan Sabha is already the largest state legislature building in India. But apparently that's also not enough. So they had to build Vikasa Saudha next to it. And they wanted to put statues of Gandhi, this, that. So they could not do any of that. So they said, okay, we're going to denotify. And usually this would have happened. Bangaloreans are quite laid back. That's what we are known for. So it would have just happened and nobody would have realized. But a few years before, in 1980, what had happened was the Athara Kacheri, there was a proposal to demolish it. Okay, Athara Kacheri by that time in 1980 would have been 110 years old. So they said it's enough, it's not serving its purpose, the building is leaky, it's not structurally, it is weak and we have to demolish it and build something else. This was all obviously not true, but people wanted to demolish it to build something new and everything. And again, that might have passed off without, but the group of concerned citizens, including the person who was in charge of INTAC at the time, the head of INTAC, she gathered a group of just interested citizens. One was a filmmaker called M. Bhaktavatsala, and there was an architect and a few others. They decided, no, we can't allow this to happen. Athara Kacheri is a beautiful building, it's part of our heritage, etc. So they actually filed a PIL, a public interest litigation, against the government, the very first of its kind. And that PIL was argued in the building that was that was going to be demolished. That was the first PIL. And in the end, the building was saved by citizen action. So that had sort of I think, entered the minds of Bangaloreans that it's possible to do this, that if we care deeply about something enough, we can actually challenge the government. So in 1998, when this denotification thing was announced, people got really upset, and for 6 weeks, unprecedented citizen activism to say, no, we are not going to let you denotify even a single square inch of Cubbon Park. This is our green heritage, and we can't let you do this. So for 6 weeks, I'm so sad that I missed it. I really enjoyed reading the newspaper reports about it. But the city came together as one. All kinds of people who otherwise you would not see in the same setting. And it started with, I think there's this guy called Bimal Desai. He is a theatre actor, but he used to run in Cubbon Park. And he saw that there was a lot of dumping from the High Court was building an annex. So they were dumping all kinds of things into Cubbon Park on his running route. And he was very upset about it. And one day he saw a commode, okay, in Cubbon Park, right? And he got so upset, he turned to his running partner who was a lawyer and said, come on, let's file a PIL. And so the activism, he ended up filing some 27 PILs over the next few years. And he began to garner support for this denotification, against this denotification thing. So there were, people like Girish Karnad would come and sit in protest in front of the Victoria statue. So there was one day and they would pass the baton so that there would always be somebody, because obviously same people can't come. Then Bimal tells this story of how it came out and this TJS George, who was the editor of the Indian Express at the time, he decided to back Bimal fully. And he said, I will support you. Every day in my Indian Express, I will carry a report about how this protest is going. So the press came together, the whole citizenry came together. And so they were theatre artists one day. Then there would be Infosys employees one day. And then there would be school children. And then Bimal started getting calls. And he tells me that, this is well before social media, change.org, nothing was there. I went from place to place collecting signatures. And I actually managed to get 1 lakh signatures from Bangalore residents, and they wrote their addresses and everything, so it's all genuine. And he has some of those sheets still. And then there were school children, and one day it was dog owners came and sat in front of them in protest, everybody. And the Bharati Vishnuvardhan, the Kannada's film fraternity turned up. And then he says, I really knew this was making an impact when I got a call from somebody who said, can you come and talk to my kitty party about this? Because we want to come and protest. So society, ladies, everybody got involved. The sad, or however you look at it, part of it was the public lost. They didn't get into vigilantism. There was no violence. It was very civilized civic action. But they lost. In the end, the 44 acres were denotified. Otherwise, Vikasa, they couldn't have been built. And there was a government press, an old British building. They demolished that. They built this. All that happened. But those 6 weeks of coverage in the press every day, and the whole Bangalore all going there, it did something to the citizens of Bangalore. It got Cubbon Park front and center of their minds. Back from, it was always there, but this became a precious resource. Then there was a group of ecologists, botanists, who voluntarily went into the Cubbon Park, did a census, how many species of plant life, how many species of beetles and bugs and insects, to show you that you lose all this every time you lose an acre. So it suddenly, in the hearts of Bangaloreans, Cubbon Park got elevated to something really important. And the fact that citizen activism can do wonders, what it means when a city comes together, that went into people's minds. So, so then after that, the government started taking interest. And now, if anybody tries to do something to Cubbon Park, enough people are there to come out and say, no, we are not going to allow this. So that is what has really changed about Cubbon Park. And it's really well maintained and all the rest of it. So, yeah.
Thanks, Roopa. I think the first call I made to you, you were like, but I haven't done any work in heritage. I think the fact that you can tell us all of this is quite fascinating. And also, I think with heritage conservation, there's activism and there's awareness program. Both of them go hand in hand. And I think, Heta, you've done both in Mumbai and Goa. You've saved a lot of buildings, a lot. And you published books and you've organized festivals. Could you tell us about a few of them?
The trick is to find a highly visible monument or a property or site to save. Like Cubbon Park has Roopa just explained to us. Our fight in Goa began in, I think, 2003 with a very small monument like a cross, just a cross that faced the whole of the city of Panjim. It's located across the river Mandovi, and it was just outside Anna Maria Goswami's house. And she came to me, and we were having a concert in a garden to spread awareness and general chit-chat about the heritage of Panjim. And she said, I have this cross and it's falling down and all that, and can you come and have a look? And I went there and had a look, and it was highly visible. So that was the thing I worked on first. That was our first campaign. So there was a trick there, like you call, we had street performers come there, did a little performance, passed a hat, collected money, restored the cross. Everyone suddenly woke up to this. Suddenly, this cross is restored and bright and sparkly and shiny right across the city of Panjim. And that's what really started. After that, we had a series of festivals. Now, I noticed that if you had to save something in Goa, you can't, do it on a shoebox. You can't do it that way. You can't. I'm sure we wouldn't have been able to do what you did in Cubbon Park. But what you can do is have concerts, have fun things happening, and people will come. So we decided that to draw attention to one of our neighborhoods, which is called Fontainhas, what we did was we had 5 art festivals there, in which we opened up every house in the neighborhood to serve as an art gallery. So we had pictures, paintings, sculptures displayed on people's ironing boards, on their fridges, on their cupboards, on their dining tables, on their sofas, and so on. Not a single nail in the wall was put to display this art. And there was a beautiful interface between visitors, artists, and the house owner. Because if the house owner is looking at the artwork, for the first time perhaps. In fact, there was a lady who said, I never entered an art gallery because I thought I had to buy something. So this is how we broke the ice in Goa over 20 years, 22 years actually.
And I think in every house that you visited, there's always been one individual who's taken a lot of responsibility in conserving their heritage. Do you have a few examples? I think people like Kundekar and all. I think you also saw a transformation in people and their interest over the years through your books.
Yeah, in fact, you very rarely get invited to people's homes. At least I used to have buddies I used to hang out with in the evening, but I'd never been to their houses. They would never invite you home in the old days. That was the thing. Maybe they were. Then slowly I realized that it's because they're embarrassed by the condition of the house. In those days, 20 years, 18 years, 15 years back, their houses were not in very good condition. And there was this Sandeep Kundaikar, who was 25 at that time, some 20 years ago. And I remember going to his place, and chandeliers were damaged, they were crumbling, the walls were falling apart. There was beautiful artwork on the walls, but they were completely not able to look after these very, very big, large homes. And I still remember him, Sandeep, looking at me totally bored with what I was trying to say, trying to convince them to restore the house or do something about the house and so on, twiddling his toes, trying to get rid of me as fast as possible. Now, 22 years later, his house he restored, he called a conservation architect. He said, Heta, at that time our condition was not very good, meaning financial condition, but now we want you to come and see the house. And it's so beautifully done up. They had a celebratory wedding there for one of his nephews and so on. So that interest is also there. Finances also have been put back into the house. And it just takes one family member, I think, to put it on its feet. Because everybody else then agrees to it. In fact, some houses run their families like corporates. The Dempos, for example, they have a board meeting of the family members. And at the board meeting, they decided that yes, we will allow Heta Pandit to come and feature our house, and this is what we are going to tell her, these are the stories we are going to share. And one person then approached me, and he gave all the stories, and then I had to, after I'd written the first draft, run it by him. He then would run it by the other members of the family. And we delayed our book by 5 months because they had another house in Santa Cruz village, and they were restoring it. And they said, can you wait? We are still in the process of restoring it. We waited, we delayed the book by 5 months because it was such a heartening thing, so endearing to think and to know that somebody was actually restoring their house so that it would come in your book.
Did conservation of houses ever start like a chain reaction with the houses?
Yeah, it did actually. And not only that, in the book also, the whole thread, if you see the book, the stories from Goan Houses, we started with Upendra Gaunikar's house for a reason. Because I was running 8 nature clubs in Panchgani. And with one of our nature clubs from Sanjeevan Vidyalaya, we had come to Goa, to the national parks and all that. Now in the middle of the forest and children enjoying the birds and the gore and sightings and all of that and smelly socks, one of our principals, the vice principal said that, we have an ex-student in Goa and he's insisting that we bring all the children to his house. And I said, my God, what a bore, going to somebody's house. And in the middle of the forest, so beautiful. And she said, no, we'll have to. He will not, now we know him, we know how insistent he is. So we went to Upendra Gaunikar's house in 1983, and I shall never forget that because he entertained all of us, the students, everyone. It was a beautiful house. I fell in love with Goan Houses at that time. I never knew then that one day I'd come to Goa and look at houses or write about them or anything like that. So I said, I have to put Upendra's house, start with Upendra Gaunikar's house. We started with the Gaunikar house. And then I met his wife, Sangeeta. And Sangeeta says, hey, but even I have come from an old house. Why don't you come and see our house? So we went to Mamai Kamath house in Panji. And then Mamai Kamath house, they said, the old days there were no hotels, no lodges or anything. High caste Brahmins will never sit and eat in a hotel, especially with the ladies there and all that. So we had to find another Brahmin house to live in. And the Dempos, when they came back from Karnataka, trying to escape forced conversion in Goa, they stayed at the Mamai Kamath house. So that led us to the Dempo house, Kaza Dempo. There we learned that all the daughters of this house are only given to Kundaikars. And Kundaikar's daughters are given to Dempos. It's very, okay, let's use the word caste. So I said, okay, then let's go to Kundaikar. And then I met Sandeep after all this time, and we recalled, and he said, can you wait? I'm getting it restored, and we have a wedding coming up and all that. So we waited, so we finished that. So we have a wedding, photographs of a wedding, and so on. So that one thing led to another, to another, to another, and so on. And Mangirish Pai Raikar, who has absolutely fascinating paintings in the reception on the first floor. I had known him for 25 years and never ever been invited to his house. Never. He runs an agricultural college and all of that. And I knew him. His brother Ramnath is a journalist. Never ever have they said even come for Ganesh or anything like that. But one of our colleagues, Alinto Coelho, brought Mangirish over and he said, I believe you're working on this book. Can you come and see? And 22 years ago, I was given this slim little book by Subodh Kerkar, who's my neighbor, an artist. And he said, Heta, I don't know where these houses are, but there's some lovely photos of houses. It was printed by the Information and Broadcasting or whatever, government of Goa. Not a single caption. Not a single reference to where these photos are from, whose houses, nothing. but there were obviously paintings done on people's walls. And I went to Mangirish Pai Raikar's house and I saw the paintings that we had been looking for 22 years. So this was the journey. Then Sudin, his cousin, comes with a big, long palm frond broom and cleans the walls so that we could take pictures. And I said, where does this broom come from? So he said, oh, it's made out of palm fronds and all. That took us to Vishnu Harwalkar's house. He makes brooms and beedis. So their house was included. And that's how we sort of, there's a whole thread of houses.
Thanks, Heta.
Not too much.
No.
Not at all. I think there was a quote once you told me from David Ogilvy, which says, you'll never see a statue of a committee at a park. You'll only see only individuals make a difference. And I think Cubbon Park is filled with statues of individuals. Could you tell us about a few individuals who've made a difference to the park? All the way from, I think, Sankey, Cubbon to Mr. Mahantesh, who you mentioned in the park, heroes of the park.
Yeah. I mean, this will take all evening, so let me see. But there are 5 statues in the park, okay? And the last one came up in 1927. So for almost 100 years, no statues have been added. And I keep hoping that we will keep it that way, that no more statues need to be added. It's, in my book, Naresh Narasimhan, who's an architect, a very well-known architect in Bangalore, and he does a lot of pro bono work for Bangalore, actually, to restore it and to make it beautiful. He says, at some point we have to realize that some things are just perfect as they are. We don't need one more tree, we don't need one more statue, we don't need anything more in Cubbon Park. One should learn to leave it and move on. So among the statues, the oldest one is, of course, Mark Cubbon, after whom the park is named. But I think very few Bangaloreans know who Cubbon was. So Cubbon was... he came from a very small island off the coast of Scotland called the Isle of Man, which you might have heard of. He came from there. His uncle, Mark Wilkes, had been in... So how it used to be in the UK? Mostly Scotsmen and Irishmen were here. Not that many Englishmen. Mostly it was Scots and Irish. And they used to come here. They became like India families. It became a thing, like... My uncle went to India, then I go to India, that kind of thing, So Mark Wilkes had been in India, in Mysore, fighting against Tipu Sultan. So he was part of that. And Mark Wilkes wrote the first history of the Mysore Maharajas, history of southern India. And then his nephew, Mark Cubbon, came when he was 25. He came to Madras and everything, and finally came to Bangalore. He was in Travancore, always in South India. And what had happened was Tipu Sultan died in 1799. That signaled the end of any more South Indian resistance to the rise of the British. So the Mysore Maharaja had his kingdom taken away from him by Hyder Ali, Tipu's dad, and Tipu. So they were all allies with the British. So the Maharaja of Mysore, the British, the Nizam of Hyderabad, the Marathas, all the common enemies of the kingdom of Mysore came together to fight Tipu. And at the end, after Tipu died, they were parceling out bits of the kingdom to everybody. And the Mysore Maharaja got restored onto the throne. But he was a very young boy at the time, the new Maharaja. And there was a divan. The Mysore Maharajas, as famous as the Maharajas are their divans, who were amazing right-hand men who really supported the king in governance and everything. So there was a divan called Purnaya who had been Hyder's divan, he had been Tipu's divan, he became the Mysore Maharaja's divan also. But he decided to retire very soon after this young boy took over, and this young boy then could not, without the experience of managing, the kingdom sort of grew into chaos, there was rioting happening everywhere, and so he had to call in the British for help. And the British, as usual, used this as obliged and used it as an excuse to say the complete mismanagement, this country cannot rule itself, country of Mysore cannot, so we will rule directly. And they sort of suspended the Maharaja and ruled from 1831 to 1881. 50 years, Mysore, Bangalore, everything came under the direct rule of the British, quite starkly contrasting with princely states elsewhere in India. Here, the British were directly in charge. And so they said what to do now. So we will put it was William Bentinck actually, who we've heard in other contexts. We haven't heard of him here. He was the one who suspended the Maharaja. And then they said we need to put somebody in charge. So we will put two commissioners. One will be a European commissioner and one will be an Indian one. Then, of course, they made the excuse that we can't find a good enough Indian one. So they said we'll put two European commissioners. And they tried to put Mark Cubbon and his senior Morrison together. But they couldn't get along. And so luckily, so then Morrison became the sole one. And then Morrison was thankfully, in 2-3 months, he got elevated to a bigger job in the central government. So who else was left? Cubbon. He came back. So 1834 to 1861, for 27 years, Mark Cubbon served as the commissioner of Bangalore. And Bangalore, Mysore, everything. And he changed the face of Bangalore and Mysore. You know, like I like to say, empire was a terrible idea. They looted India, there were so many excesses on the part of the British. But when you go down to individuals, there are a lot of individuals who really gave their all to improve the city or country that they were in charge of, and Mark Cubbon was one of them. 27 years, he filled the coffers of Mysore state, which had got completely ravaged by all the rioting that had gone on. He was a vicar's son from Scotland, so he was very frugal. So he would not spend on himself. He just said, let us fill up the coffers of Mysore. He removed corruption by paying police more. He was crazy about horses, so he put mounted police everywhere. He got a lot of horses and everything into the system. He the law was all over the place. There was no system of law, so he borrowed Arthur Wellesley's and Mark Wilkes' system of law. He put some system of law into place where there would be justice for everyone, that kind of thing. And he also he was the first guy to get the Bhagavad Gita translated into Kannada. And he also commissioned the first Kannada English dictionary. So he was beloved both by people in the city side, the kind of natives, so-called natives, and by the British because he was doing a good job of keeping And by 1861, he finally retired and went back for the very first time since he had come. He had come in when he was 25. He went back when he was 86. He retired when he was 85 because of ill health. Started going back for the first time to his native land. And when the ship was at Suez, he died on the ship. He never got home. But for 27 years, he served Bangalore. He was home. This was his home. So that was Mark Cubbon. And his statue, 1861 he dies, and immediately a statue is commissioned because both the Maharaja wants it, the British want it. So statue is commissioned and it is cast in London in the Chelsea studio of a very famous sculptor of the time called Baron Carlo Marochetti. And it travels all the way by ship. Was there a Suez Canal then? I'm not sure. 1868, I think, Suez Canal was around that time. So maybe it went all the way around the Cape of Good Hope and came, I'm not sure. Came by 1866, it was here in Bangalore. And the new commissioner who had taken over was Lord Bowring. Okay. So Bowring was here. So 1866, the statue, it's an equestrian statue because he loved horses so much. And it's standing in the parade ground. Then in 1870, the Athara Kacheri is built because Bowring comes in and he says, what is this nonsense? So first of all, remember that Cubbon was East India Company man. So very different kind of mindset. And he was 86 when he left. But in 1861 he left. 1858, the Crown had taken over. It was no longer East India Company. So they had sent new kinds of people to administer. And the new people who came in were bureaucrats. They were not soldiers. Okay, and they didn't do whatever they liked, they had to report. So this bureaucrat called Bowring had come in, he was only 38, very different from 86. So he came with a very different mindset. And he said, what is all this? Why is there so much money in Mysore coffers? Why is nothing being spent on public works? So he came with a different mindset. And our Cubbon had been operating all this time out of Tipu's crumbling palace. He refused to build himself a new set of public offices. So Bowring came, dipped into the coffers, said, take the money, build something, build new roads, build bridges, build things. And please build a new set of public offices for the administration. So who did he call on? He said, the chief engineer of Mysore. And who was he at that time? A man called Richard Sankey, after whom only the Sankey tank is named. Okay, but he gave us such beautiful buildings in Bangalore. He gave us the Atara Kacheri, he has given us Mayo Hall, he has given us the St. Andrew's Church, he's given us the Government Museum, also at Cubbon Park. So he designed all this prolifically. So that was Sankey. And then who else now? So, but these statues are not there. Only Cubbon statue. Finally, in 1870, when the park was built, it came to Cubbon Park. Who's else statue? The Queen Victoria statue is there. Yeah, so this actually, the statues in Cubbon Park really represent Bangalore in the sense of as a city, we're quite unique in the way we are able to hold our past and our present without feeling, that they are in conflict with each other. We don't want to deny our past. We're quite happy to say, yeah, we were ruled by the British and now we're ruled because so many statues of Queen Victoria were commissioned when she died, 1901 or 1902. When she died, all over India, Empress of India statues came up. Out of all of them, only 5 remain, and one of them is in Bangalore, in Cubbon Park. There was no attempt to tear it down, nothing. In fact, quite recently, it was restored in 2015. And the funniest part is Queen Victoria stands and lords it over a street, a main avenue named after the father of the nation. So she stands at the head of MG Road. Okay, and Mahatma Gandhi is in a park on the opposite side, and they're very companionably standing next to each other, no problem. So Queen Victoria's statue was unveiled by her grandson in 1905. Then her son, Edward VII. So his statue is also there. That he and she are up, bookending this Queen's Park, which is a narrow strip of Cubbon Park. So they are at either end of it. So there are these two representing the British. Cubbon sort of represents both sides. Then there are 2 more statues that represent the Indians, the Kannadigas, the Mysoreans. And those 2, one of them is Sheshadri Iyer, Diwan, and the other one is Chamarajendra Vodiyar, the 10th, who was actually the king when Cubbon Park was built, but his statue came last into the park in 1927. And in fact, his son put up that statue, and the park actually was renamed Sri Chamarajendra Park. Sri Chamarajendra's, not botanical garden, Sri Chamarajendra Park. But of course, every Bangalorean, like we will call Richmond Road, we'll call residence. You can keep on changing the names, but we'll keep calling it by the old names. And same thing happened with Cubbon Park. So the poor horticulture department finally, when they made arches quite recently, because Mahantesh. So Mahantesh Murgod was a part of the horticulture department. He took over in 2013 or so. And he did a lot for Cubbon Park. So Bimal Desai was the one who was putting all the PILs. There was a judge in the High Court called Saldana, Justice Saldana. He was also one activist judge. Like he did amazing things for Cubbon Park. He said, no more film shootings. Okay, so that was one big thing. That was to spoil Cubbon Park like anything, because everybody would rub a neck and people would come, so no more film shootings. The other thing was, people used to bus people and have rallies there, political rallies, because it was right opposite the Vidhan Sabha, so all the rallies would happen there. And that meant, again, a lot of destruction of the park. Justice Saldana, who I interviewed, told me that people would chop the branches for firewood and cook their meals in Cubbon Park. So he said, no more of that. So many things like that. And then people were apparently, he says, cutting down the sandalwood trees in the park at night, bringing their cows to graze in the park at night. So he got enclosure made, and he told the security at the park, the police at the park, that any cow that is seen wandering here and eating after dark should be impounded in that little fenced-in area. And you know what that area has become now? The Cubbon Park Dog Park. So that same fenced-in area has become the Cubbon Park Dog. So the horticulture department, this activist kind of person came, Mahantesh Murgod, and he said, we have to do various things to this. And it was during his time that the citizen petition, he took it forward and took it all the way to the top and got vehicular traffic banned in Cubbon Park on Sundays. Later it became second Saturdays and Sundays and all national holidays. And that has been such a blessing. Children can come and run around. There are no vehicles in the park. Even otherwise, the park is closed to vehicles from 10 in the night to 8 in the morning. But on Sundays and all, it's fully closed. So he doesn't have a statue, thankfully. I hope they don't decide to put his statue, but because there are enough statues. But so Chamarajendra Vodiyar, Sheshadri Iyer was an amazing Diwan. Do we have time to tell his story a little bit, or?
I think we can.
Yeah.
You can actually tell us about Sheshadri.
Sheshadri, just briefly, I will tell you about him. So, I was saying in 1831 to 1881, Mysore was under the direct rule of the British. In 1881, finally, it was restored. Around 1860s itself, Queen Victoria said, okay, we will restore it to the Maharaja of Mysore. But the heir was very young. He was only 3 years old. So she said, once he becomes 18, he can have the kingdom back. And that happened in 1881. And 1881, this young 18-year-old Chamarajendra Vodiyar, the 10th, takes over. And within 2 years, he appoints Sheshadri Iyer as his Diwan when the previous Diwan dies. So Sheshadri Iyer, for 18 years, this was a period when everybody was watching Mysore because this was the first time power had been returned. So a lot of people wanted the experiment to fail. They wanted Mysore, because a lot of British said, oh my God, this will never work. We should keep charge of it. This anglicized administration, the native government will never be able to handle all the rest of it. But so he was at the helm at that point, and he was determined to make it succeed. So was Chamarajendra. So for 18 years, he was the longest serving Diwan of Mysore. From 1883 to 1901 or 1902, when he died, he was the Diwan 18 years. And under him and Chamarajendra Vodiyar, so many changes came into Mysore, including Chamarajendra Vodiyar is amazing. He set up the first representative assembly. I mean, he was making himself redundant. He was a monarch, but he put in a people's representative assembly, and all supported by Sheshadri Iyer. Then when Jamshedji Tata came, they set up Tata Silk Farms. Then Hesargatta for the water supply. So many things they did. And then in 1894, very suddenly Chamarajendra Vodiyar dies. He was so young, and he dies of diphtheria somewhere in Calcutta. So now what do we do? Krishnaraja Vodiyar IV, who is his son, is only 10. He has to become 18. He needs a regent. Who will be the regent? Sheshadri Iyer was there, but he can't be regent. And his mother, Vani Vilas Kempananjamani, like she was 25 or 26, she had 5 children already, grieving for her husband, and with no experience in administration, she stepped in. And she and Sheshadri Iyer was such a formidable team. Some of the things they did was invite Jamshedji Tata to set up IISC here, give him permission. Shivanasamudram, the hydroelectric project, which made Bangalore one of the first cities in South Asia to be electrified. Bangalore got electricity in 1905. New York got it in 1892 or something. So soon after, Bangalore was also electrified, which led, so IISc and electrification led to Bangalore becoming this knowledge capital where all the science people came. And that is what has made Bangalore what it is today. So yeah, all these great people are in the park. So, I mean, not all of them equally great. Victoria, let's reserve comments, but yeah. But but I think that's what it is about Bangalore, that we're able to hold both of these balance. And it's largely due to the very liberal Maharajas we've had. Chamarajendra, his son his nephew Krishnaraja Vodiyar IV, and his nephew Jai Chamarajendra. All very, very liberal people who were experts in Western classical music, but also were men of science, who opened schools, English medium schools for girls, higher education. Like, they were all over the place, and wrote beautiful kritis in Sanskrit, which are sung by Carnatic musicians today. Like, amazing, amazing people.
I think something common I found about Sheshadri Iyer, and there's a person called Dada Vaidya in your book. I think something common is there's very few times that a personality is so good at what he does that he's loved by the colonizers and the colonized. And I think Seshadri Iyer and Dada Vaidya is probably the only people that the colonizers commissioned a statue elsewhere and brought it here.
The statue of Sheshadri.
Shouldn't matter, but they must have been really good at what they did. Could you tell us a little about Dada Vaidya?
Even I have a statue story. So the Portuguese ruled over Goa, Daman, Diu and Dadra Nagar Haveli for 451 years. And there were lots of viceroys that came, and sometimes there were bans on speaking Konkani, for example, or all sorts of prohibitions. And then those were turned over by the next viceroy and so on. And one of the bans was on practice of Ayurveda. So they called them Vois or Vaidyas, V-O-I-Z in Portuguese. And this particular viceroy banned Ayurveda, saying it's all mumbo jumbo, there's no science in it, and so on and so forth. So, and then his son took ill, seriously ill, and nobody could cure him, the child. So the wife, viceroy's wife, the first lady, insisted on calling Dada Vaidya, who was already very well known in Ayurveda, came from Ponda. And he, in fact, as a matter of fact, was responsible in saving the lives of many Goan women, because the women in those days never went to doctors. They would die, childbirth, all sorts of illnesses and all. But he used to sneakily take their blood samples and urine samples with the help of the women in his own house. And so the viceroy said, okay, we'll send a sample, urine sample to this so-called Ayurvedic doctor, this boys, and let's see what he says. I'll test him first. So he sends the urine sample, and Dada Vaidya has a look at it, examines it, and he says, this patient needs a nice, big, healthy dose of chickpeas. So what the viceroy had done was send a urine sample from the stables, from the horse stable to test Dada Vaidya. And then viceroy was convinced, sends the child, Dada Vaidya cures him, and the ban is lifted. Not only is the ban lifted, but a statue is commissioned in Portugal of Dada Vaidya. So that was unheard of and unprecedented in those days.
I think every house that's featured in your book also has a story, myth, legend that's associated with it. Could you tell us a few? Like the Kundai house has a founding story. The Temple house has a Lakshmi story. Could you tell us a few?
Which one now? It's time for one.
The
I can.
Kundai house founding story?
Shall I go with the Savardekar Wada one? Sure. Okay. So there's this house called the Savardekar Wada, and it's really 5 big houses rolled into one. And we were told when we went there, very well welcomed us, but we were told not to step on the second step of the house. There were 5 or 6 steps going up. And the reason being is that in those days, there used to be dacoits coming to your house to rob you. And the dacoits would give you an appointment. They would say, we are coming on such and such day, on such and such time, keep all your jewelry and whatever, gold coins and all. But if they came without an appointment, without giving you forewarning, you could shoot at them. That was allowed. So these dacoits come without warning, the family is taken unawares. But as it so happened that on the second step, they see this absolutely stunningly beautiful lady in a 9-yard silk sari, full jewelry, vermilion on her forehead. And she's sitting there on the second step of that house. And they take her to be Sri Shanta Durga, who's our Durga, and they go back. So since that day, we are not supposed to put our foot on the second step. This is the legend. And legends in Goa are very real. They're very real. All our guardian spirits, for example, are very real to us. They're not like, some spirit or some superstition or something.
Thank you, Heta. I have one last question before we open it out to questions from the audience. Both of you all are heavily invested in heritage walks. Heta, you will have a heritage walk festival happening soon, and I know you've been conducting the Cubbon Park Heritage for a long, long time. Could you tell us about a little bit with your experience with the heritage walks? What's happened over all these years?
Hari, you should tell everybody about the heritage
walk.
Hari is actually looking at at a 16-day festival where we have 25 different walks happening. Do you want to tell us a few of those walks? Okay, let me. So I won't put you in a spot. There's a salt pan walk, which Talula de Silva does, where she takes you through the salt pans and you actually get to see how salt is harvested, is mined, and she also tells you about what difficulties the salt panners go through. There are lots of crustaceans in the salt water, how they get blisters on their feet in the hot sun and so on. So it's a beautiful walk that she does. And then there's Vishal Rawley, who takes you through the period signage in Panjim. We talk about Art Deco, period signage. Then there is a promenade walk. Panjim has the longest promenade on a riverfront in India. 7 kilometers long. So one of our architects takes us on that walk. We have an old Goa walk where the Museum of Christian Art is also included. Then we have the, which one? We have 25.
Actually, 25 walks in total. And the idea of the festival was a lot of time the areas covered are the same areas, but each person comes in with a different perspective. There's someone who is looking at it through oral histories of families. There's someone who is looking at it through trees and plants. There's someone looking at it through architecture. So the idea of the festival was also to make residents of Goa ambassadors of the state, so they know what they're living amidst. But how did it start?
The city is full of surprises. We have a medicinal plant walk right in the middle of Panjim. We have a tree walk in Altin in Panjim.
What was your first experience like organizing heritage?
Now, Jack Sukija and I decided that we'll do walking tours because that's the best way to know your city and best way to introduce our own people to their own city. So way back in 2000, we went to Lohar Chawl in Bombay. We bought these little headphones and whatnot, which were way ahead of our time. We invested a lot of our money and we thought we'll make a lot of money. It was a magnificent failure. There was, right through the year, we got only 5 guests. That was the year 2000. Today, we have 25 walk festival happening, starting 1st April in the hot summer, on a hot summer days. And not only that, sometimes our walking, we have 2 professional walking groups. We have one or two people who do tours in the remote areas of Goa, like Savani Shetty. She does village walks, remote area walks. And sometimes we have groups coming to say, are you on this person's walk or are you on that person's walk? We have so many walks happening every day, almost 5 in the Pontainish in the heritage neighborhood of Panjim. So we've certainly come a long way. And the thing is that I think walking tours, and I think you'll agree with me, that's the best way for a citizen to know his or her own city. The other thing that's happening in Goa now is we're moving away from this sun, sand and sea and beach kind of tourism. Wedding destination is fine. But there are a lot of new settlers that arrived in Goa after the pandemic scare. And these people are settled down now. They've decided not to go back to wherever they come from. And they, in turn, are getting interested in their own, in the land of their adoption. So we've got a lot of people, new settlers. For a last walking festival, for example, we had a lot of new people who are saying, we want to know more about the land we've adopted and the land that's adopted us.
What's the response to your heritage walks been like, Roopa?
Actually, we've had a different experience, at least initially, because Bangalore is always a place which is very open to new ideas, any new experiences. Everybody is an experience junkie here. You start something new, everybody wants to know what is going on. So when we started in 2005, I mean, it was received with such excitement. And the press gave us a lot of coverage. And another huge advantage that Bangalore has is its weather. You can walk and walk and walk through the year. There is no season where you have to shut down the walks or where people will say it's too hot to walk, it's too cold to walk. or too rainy. Rainy last year, okay, anyway. But, but it doesn't rain so much in the day, it's true. It only afternoon it starts raining. So if you want to do a morning walk, there's always... so we got a lot of initial excitement. There's a lot of support for the walk. But it really, I mean, as time went on, every Sunday we used to just go stand there. I've done 3-hour walks for 3 people, 2 people, you know, that kind of thing. But one thing we've done with Bangalore Walks is that we have never to date advertised. Except on our own website, we haven't printed a single flyer or we haven't put up a single poster anywhere. So we have grown only through word of mouth. And yeah, now we're doing well. But apart from us doing well, it is that our experience has encouraged and inspired so many other walking tours in Bangalore. So there's plenty going on. We are a very small outfit, just 2 or 3 of us. But people have taken it up as something to do, and the whole city is now walking, going here. Lots of walks and tours happening in Bangalore as well.
Yeah. I think, you know, when you volunteer and you put an idea out, like a pioneering work that we do, spade work, without any commercial angle to it, you can only take it up to a point. And after that, when companies get interested, 2 people, 3 people set up a company, like we have Maria Victor and Murli, who set up Make It Happen. And they start making it commercial. That's, I think, is the measure of our success.
Ours was commercial only to begin with. Yeah, okay. Ours was commercial. I thought when Bangalore companies began to get interested in corporates.
Oh, okay.
You know, we thought we were going to be taking only visitors to Bangalore. But we have had the most excitement from locals who have lived here all their lives. And like Hari was saying, that he has been in Cubbon Park, he was there every Sunday but didn't know its history. It's the aha that we get from people who have always lived here, 3rd generation, 4th generation, without knowing anything of the history of Bangalore. I think that's been the most rewarding thing, is just to introduce your city to you. So that has been really lovely.
It's also a learning curve for us, no? Yeah. When people come up with saying, what about this and what about that, and I read somewhere this, and also it's learning for us also.
Yes,
so
and they keep
I
filling
look forward to all the walks, because it's not like, oh, I know everything. I'm like...
No, and people ask me, how can you do the same script over and over and over again? How many years? But every time it's different, because the response is different. The people who are coming on your walk is different. And in between one walk and another, you have read something more, which has dropped one more penny into place, one more piece of the puzzle, and you add that to your story. And for me, because I lead children's walks, school walks, oh, it's so rewarding. And then the parents come, they say, we've been hearing about Veera Ballala and Kempegowda the whole time, because the children go back and talk about it. And then the parents get interested. So it's a very lovely, virtuous cycle that happens, you know.
Thank you, Roopa and Heta. I think it's time
we
open up the floor for questions from the audience.
Hello, am I audible? Yes. Good evening. My name is Mr. Akhil, a long-time resident of Bengaluru. First of all, I'd like to thank both the speakers for their erudite presence at BIC. It's really an honor and privilege, not just for me. I'm sure the entire audience, esteemed audience here, would agree. Thank you so much for making it to Bengaluru, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. My first, not comment, let me just say observation is, thank you, Roopa Pai. You're such erudite speaker and such a treasure trove of Bengaluru that I've never come across any person who is such a erudite knowledge container.
There are so many people.
I mean, you unlocked so many secrets of Bengaluru that I have never come across anyone in the past 3 decades. I mean, Bengaluru unlocked today at BIC. Thank you so much. Thank you. And one thing you said Lord Bowring called up someone, General Richard Sankey, right? The first thing which came to my mind when you said Lord Cubbon called someone in Mysore, the first person who came was Vishweshwaraya. Then I stood corrected, it's General Richard Sankey, unbelievable. And then one more thing, thank you so much for Taranauts. I mean, it's some kind of science fiction out of this galaxy. I mean, how did you come across, what made you to come up with such a fantastic piece of literature? Can you please share it with us?
Yeah, sure.
Because the imagination in those books is...
Have you read them?
I've just read the blurb, to be honest. Okay. I mean, the imagination in those books is is international. I mean, it's no Indian author so far, I think, has come up with such book.
No, there are many. Yeah, how did I, actually, it's a very interesting story how I came up with it. Me and my editor, my wonderful editor, Vatsala Kaul from Hachette, India. So I wanted to write a series inspired by Enid Blyton's Faraway Tree. I don't know if how many of you have read the Faraway Tree series, but there is a tree that comes up and a different world appears on top of the tree every 15 days or something, and the children go up, visit that world and learn something. They meet some creatures, something. So I wanted 3 kids, or 2 kids, or whatever, some kids, protagonists from India, child protagonists, to go out, solve some problem in some other world or something, and then come back and apply it, their knowledge, what they've learned there, to an Indian problem, and see where that goes. Okay, that was the original idea. But then my editor said, okay, this is fine, but what will these children call their mother? And I'm like, what? So she said, will they call her ma or mummy or mom or ai or ammi or... I said, how does that matter? She said, no, every time an Indian child calls his or her mother something, it sets it in a particular geography of India. And then you may not want to do that. You might want to make it more pan-Indian. So how do you do it? Then that got me thinking. She said, maybe you set it in a parallel universe, which is somewhat like India, but not quite India. And then that led to this. So I said, how many books, how many worlds do they visit? Okay, to find this, to have their adventures. And that took me back to the Belur Halebeedu temples, which are 11th century temples near Hassan and the capital of the Hoysala kingdom. And there, when we used to do tours there as well, and what fascinated me about the Belur Halebeedu temples was the compass, which is embedded into the ceiling. It's a Hindu compass. It doesn't have any words on it, nothing. There are the guardians of the 8 directions, and by identifying the guardian, you know which direction is which. Okay, so I said, oh, so let's base it on that, and let's have 8 worlds in the 8 cardinal directions, and these children go there and they solve problems. And the other inspiration was Harun and the Sea of Stories by Salman Rushdie, where he chutneyfies English and, uses English and Indian language words. So I did the same with Tara knots. So apparently in this land called Mithya, they speak a language called Tara tongue. And that is an amalgam of English words and Indian language words. So for instance, the children love foods called, like for instance, creposa. What's a creposa? It's a crepe and a dosa. And they love samchoris, okay, which are very samosa kachori. And then the teachers or the mentors are called Ak mentors, which is Acharya plus mentor. So things like that. And the adults love this very stimulating drink called Brunesca, which is brew and Nescafe together. so things like that. So I really had a blast writing these books. And if you read it, and a lot of adults have enjoyed it because they get all the little references to Indian culture, which maybe the children don't get. That's how it...
Yeah, that's something unbelievable. I think everybody would agree. And can I give you one humble recommendation, please? Can you please start a podcast about Bengaluru's heritage?
Sure.
Because you're a walking treasure of Bengaluru, I mean, to put it mildly. And coming to Goa, I have one last observation. There's this, when everybody walked in today, there's this LED TV panel which had the image of a blue house, and there was a small mention of Susan Montero mansion.
Sousa Montero.
Yeah, Sousa Montero. Why is it so prominently there, and why was that image chosen of Susan Montero's mansion? Is there any specific reason for why that blue house was chosen?
I think it's just a very striking house. It's one of the houses included in...
Panchim?
No, it's in a village called Sioli, where Remo Fernandez also comes from. And it's a very striking image, a nice, big, beautiful, large house. And the father, the old dad, had built 2 floors exactly the same for his 2 sons. The most charming thing about that house is the Sousa Monteros. They're all musicians. So the dad's brother, who's a bachelor, dad, mom, daughter, son, all musicians. And every evening at 5:30, they all play. in a band. They've got their own little band and they have their music room and all that. And sometimes the mom said, Suzette said, I go down to water the garden because if the gardener has not come. So they all come close to the window and they play for her while she's watering the garden. I thought it was so charming, you know. It's a lovely family. All the families are beautiful, but this one was really, really special.
Yeah. Regarding this heritage conservation in Goa, my final closing comment would be...
I think we need to give somebody else a chance
one
to
closing comment. It's
ask
very
a
important.
question.
I'm sorry, this closing comment. Many Goan houses don't have this heritage tag like Fountain House, which has the UNESCO World Heritage tag. So if many of the...
Fountain doesn't have. In fact, it was declared a conservation area way back in 1974 with UNESCO support, backing. But
so it's not a World Heritage site?
No.
I stand corrected.
No, that's okay. I mean, in any case, World Heritage Site is just like they recognize it. It's like a recognition. It doesn't afford you any protection. Even Old Goa, where the 8 monuments are World Heritage Sites, it doesn't, unless ASI declares it, our government doesn't recognize. It's just a recognition that UNESCO gives. If something happens in Old Goa, as something did happen, a very important lady from the ruling party built a bungalow right there next to St. Cajetan Church, which is an ASI monument, on an ASI site. UNESCO did not get involved. They won't get involved.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I think we'll also pause our conversation for tonight. If anyone wants to ask Heta or Roopa questions, we will be outside. I'd like to thank Roopa and Heta for being part of this evening. Everyone who helped put both the books together, the entire team at BIC, and all of you all for making it here this evening. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Hari, for being such a great moderator.